Hello and welcome to On Point, a podcast by Oak Street Funding, where we bring research and data-backed insights to dig into the minds of industry leaders, to learn how to stand out and navigate and break through this ever-changing industry. I'm your host, Bridget Height, and you can support this podcast by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on our website, or wherever you get your podcasts. We will be there hanging out, talking to industry leaders, and ready to empower you to grow your business. Now let's get on point. So today I am delighted to be with Susie McEuen, VP of Sales at Oak Street Funding, and we are also excited to be joined by Christina Traurig and Mackenzie Parsons, both principals and financial planners at Cornerstone Financial Planning. Today they are going to tell us their story about succession and what it takes to be prepared to be a successor. Thank you so much for being here, ladies. Thank you, Susie, for being here.
Thank you, Mackenzie and Christina. This is a real pleasure for me to have you here today and tell your story. We go way back to October 2020, right? And that was in the height of COVID. And you had reached out to Oak Street Funding. You'd heard about us. And I think you talked to one of our lead development specialists, Dawn. And Dawn had reached out to me to schedule a call with the both of you. And I have shared your story in confidence, not using your names to protect the innocent, so to speak. But I have shared your story because you've done everything correctly. And besides the fact that you're a delight to work with, to be where you are today, buying out two founders. And I just felt like it's important for other advisors and owners of RIAs to hear how you did it, because it checked all the boxes for us. And so we started our conversation back in October 2020, and we talked for a couple of years off and on. And you had great questions that were so important because you were trying to figure out, if we were the right fit for you, because you were talking to other lenders, as well as, are you the right fit for us as a client? It's got to be a good match. And what I tell my borrowers today that are looking at needing capital for either buying out a shareholder or partner buy-in, I tell them, you need to get to know us. We need to get to know you to make sure that we can help you to the full extent. And so we brought you in today, and we really appreciate you offering to tell your story. And so at this time, I'd like to turn it over to the both of you and just tell us how you ended up at Cornerstone. I know, Mackenzie, you became at Cornerstone first, and then Christina, you onboarded, I think, a few years after. So, ladies,
let's hear it.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you, Bridget and Susie. And I'm going to kick it off here and tell you a little background. So I have been in the industry for about 15 years. I was a senior in college looking for a job in financial services during the fall of 2008, which may have been the worst timing ever to be looking for a job. However, I was offered a position at a local solo RIA, and this was a really great experience because the solo practitioner brought me right into the client meetings, which can be hard to get in front of clients when you're just starting out. And he really opened up the inner workings of his business and gave me immediate exposure to working with clients, an introduction to the compliance side. And I learned a lot about how and how not to run a business. I was there for about a year when I knew I had to get out and explore larger opportunities. At that time, I had my Series 3 and my 65. So I was really interested in commodities trading, and I was thinking about going to Chicago. But I decided that was a bit too far from my main roots. So I Googled financial planning, Portland, Maine, and Susan Belagore showed up. And she was the owner of Cornerstone Financial Planning. I met with her, and she told me that they weren't in a position to hire, but if I wanted to be a financial planner, the CFP designation was the gold standard, which was great advice. I ended up moving to Boston and started at UBS Private Wealth Management. I worked on a team there and again had just a great experience and exposure of how large companies work. So the good pieces of that, all of the institutional research and benefits, and then also the bad side of just all of the red tape and not being able to make any changes. So while I was there, I went to Boston University and completed my CFP coursework, and I earned my designation in 2013. And at that point, I was pretty certain that a smaller company was going to be a better fit for me, and that I wanted to move back to Maine and Portland specifically because it's a great town. I dug up my old email exchange with Susan and I reached out to her for just an informational session about where I should be looking for financial planning opportunities in Portland. And she said she would be happy to meet with me and that her business partner, Jill, would join as well, which I thought was interesting. And when I met with them, it turned out that the week before I emailed, they had just decided to hire their first financial planner. So this informational meeting was actually a job interview.
Yeah.
And now I'm co-owner and will be celebrating my 10th anniversary at Cornerstone in April.
I love that. That's such a great story.
I love it. And I'll add before turning it over to Christina, getting a CFP is very difficult. And I applaud you both for doing what you did. I actually, in my lengthy career as a banker, was encouraged to transition from lending to become an investment advisor. So at one point, I was actually studying to get my CFP, and I was going to go that direction. And so that's why I admire both of you and have a lot of respect because I know what you went through to get your CFP. And, but I, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, I stayed on the lending side. So congratulations to both of you. Christina, love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us on. Bridget, big fan of the podcast. Susie, always great to see you in any setting that we get a chance to talk. So for my path, it was a little bit different than Mackenzie's. So I had earned my bachelor's degree in finance, but I ended up in a few different jobs in accounting because what I was seeing in the world of finance was more of a sales position. And I knew that's just not something that I wanted to do. So I just went ahead and took some accounting jobs. But after a few years, I decided that wasn't my path. I really liked parts of the accounting world, but I did realize that I wanted more interaction with people. I wanted to be able to talk with people and to help them. And I just wasn't getting that fulfilled in the accounting world. So I decided to, go back to taking another look at the world of personal finance. And at the same time, I decided I wanted to also get my MBA. So I moved from Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm from, down to Louisville, Kentucky. I did an accelerated MBA program, which also matched you with an internship. So that's when I got my first exposure to working at a small RIA in Louisville, Kentucky. I will say it was a great exposure and a great introduction to the world of personal finance, and I learned a lot. The owner even made me the CCO at some point, so that was really interesting and a great learning experience. But same as Mackenzie, in her first position, I also learned a lot about, what you shouldn't do as business owner. And I also had more of an idea of exactly where I wanted to end up in the financial planning industry, because the way I worked with my clients, I liked, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to do a little bit more. So I stayed there for a few years. I wanted more, couldn't really see a future there. So I decided to open up my job search nationwide. I went to the CFP job board and I just said, what all is out there? I'm willing to move anywhere for a company that I feel connected with and that aligns with my values, and I can work with clients the way that I want to work with clients. And that's how I found Cornerstone Financial Planning, was on the job board. They had an ad out there. So I reached out. They flew me out to New England, my first time in New England. I got to meet everyone at the firm. So the founders, Susan and Jill, and then I got to meet Mackenzie, and I felt really connected to everyone from the beginning. So I just knew that that was a firm that I wanted to work for. So I also did a lot of research because, again, it was my first time even being in New England. So I wanted to know a lot about what my new hometown would be. I really liked what I saw. So 7 years later, here I am, loving my hometown now of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, loving working at Cornerstone. So that's how I got to found Cornerstone and why we're here today.
I love both of those stories. So thanks for sharing. And Susie, when you hear that story, what do you want listeners to take away from what they did right up to that point?
Well, they obviously have worked in a couple of different RIAs, and they saw what it was like to run a business. And as we all know, some people are not cut out to be a business owner. And so this would give them the opportunity to see if this is what they wanted to do. And you spent the time, the years, especially with a smaller RIA, seeing what it's like, the back office compliance requirements, and being client facing, HR issues, the management, the collecting the fees, the accounting side of it, and you guys both complement each other. So I think that's a big takeaway, is that it may not be for everyone to be an owner of a business, and I'd love to hear more of how you both feel about that, and why you obviously have been so successful.
Yeah, so I'll start, Mackenzie, and then I'll let you chime in. But I think it was on the table for Mackenzie and I from the beginning that ownership was a potential in the future. I know in my interview on the last day, in the last hour, when they were offering me the job, they were just like, "Oh, by the way, this is an opportunity for you in the future." So definitely, even my mindset going into Cornerstone from the beginning was, oh, wow, this is a great path for me. So I think there was definitely a mental shift even going into the job of like, I'm going to treat this as if I am the owner because I will be one day. And I think that was really good to get my mindset ready for it. So I've basically been preparing to be the owner of Cornerstone since I started. And then with Mackenzie and I working together, we definitely fostered a relationship from the beginning. And that was really important to our founders, that we did have a really good working relationship. So Mackenzie and I were together at least once a month from the beginning of my time working at Cornerstone, talking about different areas of financial planning. And then I think in 2018, that's when it morphed into, okay, well, actually, now we're going to start talking about different areas of actually running the business. Mackenzie, do you want to talk more about that part of it?
Sure. Well, and I'll just add too. So, when the two founders, Susan and Jill, hired me, I was the first financial planning hire, and then they had a client service manager. And so, when we put the job out there about hiring that next financial planner, it was, that person's going to be my business partner. And so, I think there was a lot of pressure on,
Sure.
we're not just looking for a financial planner. And I think, like Susie said, not everyone's cut out, one, to be an owner, and then two, to work well together. So it did put a lot of pressure on it. And like Christina said, like, I think everyone just really clicked in that first interview. And so I think that made things kind of easy. And we've been working so closely. So back in around 2018, so 4 years before our buyout, the founders started to give us different areas of the business management for us to really take on, and start learning that day to day and actually doing it, which I think was such good hands-on training with them still there that we could ask questions to. So Christina took over compliance and investments, and I took on accounting and HR. So we had been doing that work and, like we said, kind of running the business for about 3.5 years before the buyout. And so that just really created such a smooth transition for us.
So Christina and Mackenzie, I do have a question for you. If you could do it all over again, is there anything that you would do differently?
Yes, absolutely. I think whenever a deal is done, I think it's only natural to just kind of go back, reflect, see, how things went, how they could have went differently, how they could have went better. So when I've reflected back on the transition that we made, I will say the thing that keeps coming up for me is I would have expressed more appreciation for the founders. Where Mackenzie and I were sitting, our thought was, well, we're paying you and it's a large sum of money. So clearly we appreciate the business that you've built and we find it valuable because we're willing to, go out there, get a loan, pay for it. But I think we just discounted actually saying the words, we appreciate everything that you put into this business and what you built. Because with any transaction, I feel like you're on two different sides of it. There's going to be a little bit of contention. And I feel like whenever there was an issue that came up, it boiled down to they just didn't feel appreciated enough because we weren't actually saying the words. And for them, they were also going through a really big transition. They were selling a business and they were about to phase into retirement. And that's a really big thing in your life. So I think we could have had a little bit more empathy for that. But again, it was just hindsight of we could have done a little bit better with that. And then also from the transaction standpoint, I think we could have brought a CPA into our process a little bit earlier than what we did because there's a lot of really complicated tax implications when you go through succession planning, and making sure that you really understand it, I think is very important. So I would have brought the CPAs in a little bit sooner than what we did.
Yeah, I would agree with definitely looping in all of the professionals earlier in the process. We were kind of following a timeline that was given to us. And so we had started with the attorneys about 2 months in advance, which we thought would be the easy part of the deal, just executing something that we had already agreed to because we had a term sheet that all four of us had already signed. But we actually ended up missing our original deadline because of all of the back and forth with the attorneys in writing it in a way that's actually legal. So I think I would have rather started with them much earlier in the process. I think it would have taken some of that stress and that like crunch time out of it. We also engaged with Susie much earlier than was originally recommended. So like Susie said, I think we engaged 2 years before. And I think that was really great because we just were able to get really comfortable with our lender and with the deal. And the other thing that I would definitely change is having everything in writing, even if the details seem so small. You may think that you're all on the same page or that something is clear, but in hindsight, I think it can be put up for interpretation.
Good advice. Okay. So besides working with Oak Street Funding, did you have any assistance from other sources with the transition?
Yes, we did. We had the help of Brandon Kwal from Advisor Growth Strategies. So Brandon and Advisor Growth, they're the ones that actually came up with the structure of our deal and are the whole reason that we reached out to Susie about outside funding. And the reason we reached out to Brandon initially is when all of this started, Mackenzie and I were talking to a lot of other RIAs in our area, seeing what they were doing for succession planning. We talked to some of the owners and sometimes we talked to the successors. But what we found is not a single firm is doing succession planning the same way. So, made it a very fun process for us. So at some point we realized we did need some additional help. And one of the other RIAs that we talked to, they were the ones who suggested that we reached out to AGS, Advisor Growth Strategies, in order to help us figure out a structure of the deal. So I would say they were our main partner in how we actually ended up structuring the deal.
Great. Thanks for that. So something we're hearing regularly is that it's getting harder for Gen 2 to afford the transactions. So Susie, what are you hearing about that? And then Mackenzie and Christina, I would love to hear from you about that as well.
The one thing that I will add on behalf of Oak Street Funding is that we provide partner buy-in loans besides shareholder buyout. And so we provided financing for Mackenzie and Christina to buy out these two shareholders. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't have any ownership before that. So we were doing 100% buyout. And we were a little creative when we did this because of the timing of interest rates, and I'll get into that in a moment. But to your point, Bridget, it's that what these owners are wanting as far as a price, the value of what they've worked really hard for, to be able to pass that on to the next gen. And definitely Christina and Mackenzie were both selected from these owners to be the successors. And the one thing I want to add that I think is important for the listeners and the viewers to hear is that the two of you, I remember asking a question at one point. I wanted to know, can you run a business? And both of you like chimed in. We've been doing this for several years. We've been running HR. We've been doing all the compliance. And I was like, wow. So that's important to know, because as a lender, we want to know if you're going to be able to take over the reins. And are you qualified to do that? And are you comfortable? Because we have seen partners that have bought in that they're like, down the road, they go, you know what, this is not for me. It's not for everyone. And to your point earlier about, that we've talked for so long, it's most of the borrowers that I work with, they've never done anything like this before. And to your point, getting yourself surrounded by all the experts, consultants, attorneys, CPAs, to make sure, because we can't consult on the tax situation. But going back to your original question, is that we're finding out the values have stayed strong on these RIA practices or businesses, and the second gen or the partners that that the founders are looking to sell to, they can't afford to buy in. They're raising families, they're buying homes, they're paying for college education, and they don't have the liquidity sitting around to be able to help them put a down payment. And the one thing that we do at Oak Street, we provide conventional lending. They're not SBA loans. We do provide 100% financing on partner buy-ins. In the case of when you bought out the founders, we like an alignment of the risks. We want the owners, the shareholders that are selling to the next gen, to have a little bit of an alignment where they have a seller note. And that way, the risk is less on you all as well as for us. And if I recall, I think Mackenzie and Christina, that the founders even delayed you paying them on the seller note like a year. And the way they structured it, it seemed like it was such a great structure of a transaction. That way you guys can get going starting to pay Oak Street back, as well as then there was a slight delay on paying, the interest on the seller notes, principal and interest. But today, with the values staying the way they are, founders need to look at, do they need to give these partners that are buying in or that are buying out the shareholders some type of discount on these valuations, and give you some kind of what I call sweat equity as a result of your hard work of being there as long as you have to get where you are to be able to buy out the founders.
Mackenzie and Christina, do you feel that is the case?
So Mackenzie and I had talked to a bunch of different lenders before we landed on Oak Street as being our partner, because we really wanted to understand what the requirements were for the different lenders out there. And I will say it was pretty difficult, because where Mackenzie and I are in our stages of life, being Gen 2, we were purchasing our first properties, and we don't have huge sums of money laying around. We're trying to max out our retirement plans, just like we tell our clients to do. So certain lenders might have wanted, a large cash balance in your bank account, which we didn't necessarily have, because like I said, it was the stage of life we were in. Or they might have wanted to put a lien against your personal residence, which was something that we were a little bit more skeptical of. So we really wanted to understand the different requirements, and it was difficult. Back to what Susie said, we did it as 100% buyout. We didn't do the small tranches before the official buyout, because that's just what we chose for our personal buyout, because again, everyone does this completely differently, and that's what we had decided was best for us. So it was pretty difficult, but huge shout out to Susie for walking us through the process and making it super easy and explaining very clearly what Oak Street's requirements were and making sure that we were comfortable with everything. So from what was required of us personally and what was required of the company, our terms of the loan, and everything. She did a great job of explaining it to us.
That's great. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I have a question for you, Christina Mackenzie. We structured the financing and we did like a 10-year note, and a lot of lenders provide that. And there was a seller note involved too. The one thing that we do at Oak Street, we have you prepare a pro forma of revenue and expenses, because what happens, when a shareholder buyout, things are going to look a little bit differently once the shareholders are out. Maybe they were taking salary, maybe they were deducting expenses that maybe are not going to be the same for you all. So we rely on that information. We look at historical to see how you're going to be able to afford it, that the firm is going to repay the debt. But we also look at the future to see how that is going to work cash flow wise to cover our debt service as well as the seller. So maybe tell us, how is that working for you?
Yeah, I think it's working really well because we did all of that pre-planning. And I think, Susie, just as you want to be comfortable with our financials, I think as future business owners, you need to be comfortable with it. That first buy, sell, or that first big transaction is kind of the beginning. And then as you're now running the business, you need to make sure that your financials and your cash flow is able to support that financing and that payment plan. So yeah, for us, it's the note to Oak Street, and then it's also a note to our sellers. So being able to fit both of those payments into our budget going forward. And you also need to be thinking about, okay, once those founders aren't there, are you replacing them? Is that an additional salary? And then also including all of those other benefits you might be offering, and also just projecting out the budget to say, how are expenses going to inflate over the next 5 years? So Christina and I did a lot of work in Excel doing that pro forma and really looking out and doing different scenarios. What if the markets correct 20% like they did in 2022? Or, what if there's a smaller downturn? Are we able to still run and support this business from this cash flow? And I think it worked both ways. Susie was comfortable with it and we were comfortable as well.
And that's one thing that we do at Oak Street. We make sure our underwriting team, we do stress tests in a case, especially we started talking during COVID. Then we had a downturn in the market. Then we have interest rates going up, and we were being creative there. Like, even though we knew you didn't have to pay the founders until January of 2023. It's been a year now. Congratulations. We closed early because rates were going up, and we did like a line of credit and did a draw in January of 2023. So we were trying to be one step ahead to help you to make sure that things were going to be locked in, so it wasn't going to impact the payment amount at that point. So great job.
So I do have a question about valuations. Did you have a valuation prepared?
We did not have an official valuation prepared for Cornerstone. We did explore it to see what it would look like to have an evaluation prepared and what it would cost to have that valuation done. But once we engaged with Advisor Growth Strategies and they came up with this formula that put a valuation on it figured out what our price was going to be for the purchase, we dropped doing the official valuation because the four of us didn't feel like that was necessary.
Okay, that's great to know. So what has been the biggest challenge moving from an employee of an RIA to owner? And then what advice would you share for those advisors who are transitioning from employee to partner?
So I would say the biggest challenge is balancing the responsibilities of being a business owner and continuing to be financial planners. Christina and I have done a lot of time tracking in the past. Probably we're going on our 6th year on, we keep an Excel spreadsheet with a very detailed analysis of how we spend our day. So we can tell you exactly how much time we spend per client, preparing, meeting with clients, follow up on HR or accounting or compliance. And
Wow.
so I would recommend time tracking. And I know sometimes people don't like it. Christina and I really enjoy it. But I think it allows it to become really clear on when you need to make other decisions. So, for example, Christina and I can tell when we could take on additional clients or when we need to hire someone to outsource HR to because it's becoming too much of my time. And so as we continue to grow the business, which is the goal and is happening, those business responsibilities do require more and more time. So by doing that tracking, it really allows us to prepare for the future and be strategic about our next step.
It's so smart. Christina, do you have anything to add to that?
Just how much I love our time tracking. I understand that it's an Excel spreadsheet and not everyone's going to be comfortable tracking their time in Excel, but it works for us. If it doesn't work for you, feel free to use one of the other programs. But I agree with everything that Mackenzie said. Besides what she said, I didn't find too many challenges, but that also goes back to how we were prepared for the transition and learning how to run the business before the transition actually happened. Otherwise, if we didn't have that one-on-one training, I think it would have been a really big challenge to take over the different areas of actually running a business if we didn't have any guidance in those areas.
I love that you both love and geek out on the Excel time tracking. You appreciate that from each other. Well, thank you for all of that. And I just want to ask, are there any last pieces of advice for those early in their careers who are wanting to follow a similar path as you?
Yeah, I would say if you are interested in ownership, you should talk to the owners of your company and make it known that that is something that you would like to do. Unless you speak up, the owners might not think that that's something that you want. So if you start talking about it and asking questions, you can start talking or start a conversation with the owners of is this realistic? What do I need to do to set myself up for success? I also think it's super valuable to network with your peers. So talk to other G2 people who are in a similar position to you. What are they doing at their firms? What are they doing to set themselves up for success? And then also just talking to other RIA owners, maybe who are in the position you want to be in. Ask them how they got to where they are and if they have any advice for you. So that's what I have.
Mackenzie, do you have any advice?
Yeah, just that it does take a long time to get it right and to be prepared for it. So I think I said earlier, when business ownership was first put on the table, I knew it was something I wanted, but I didn't want to do it alone. So it just takes time to find that right partner. Researching all of the different options for succession planning, we had looked into an earnout and a profits interest, and all of that time and energy that went into that research really allowed us to feel comfortable in the transition of the clients and then ultimately the business responsibilities.
Great. So, Susie, do you have any advice for when somebody calls you and sets up their goals for being just like Mackenzie and Christina?
Yeah, I call you guys the poster child. I'm serious because
she really did. Before we even got on this, she was talking about how you were the poster kids for this. For all this.
You did all the things right. And so as a lender, we're asking a lot of questions in regards to the finance side. And just like you said, a lot of lenders may want to encumber a home. And so there's a lot of things to think about personally as well as professionally. Is it going to be the right situation? But also the fact that being prepared. And I think what helped us work together, and we enjoyed working with you, is that you were able to answer a lot of questions that are intangible. Your experience and understanding of running a business and you could be, like I said earlier, a great financial planner, an investment advisor, but can you run the actual business? And so when I, as a lender, have to present a loan to our credit committee or our directors, I have to tell your story. And so all that information, as we got to know each other over a couple of years, really is helpful. The organization that you have. And so start early. If you think that you're going to end up needing financing, get to know us, let us get to know you. And that way we can help you through the journey to be successful, just like Mackenzie and Christina with Cornerstone.
Well, I am so happy that you were able to join us. Thank you so much for your stories. I think our listeners are going to be motivated and inspired. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you all for listening to On Point, a podcast by Oak Street Funding, where we bring research and data-backed insights to dig into the minds of industry leaders to learn how to stand out, navigate, and break through this ever-changing industry. I'm Bridget Height, and tune in next time wherever you listen to podcasts as we get on point. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review.